I'm a fan.
That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free.
If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or...
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
Well, here we are again. Thank God it's another Friday edition of Green Rush Live. Hi, everybody. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. We have an interesting show today, like we always do. Unfortunately, I was supposed to have Deborah Borchardt as my co-host, but she got called away at the last minute late yesterday afternoon. So luckily, we have an awesome stand-in named Christopher Smith from the American Cannabis Report. So Christopher, thank you so much for stepping up and joining me as co-host today.
My pleasure. You know, anytime I get mentioned in the same sentence as Deb Borchardt, it's a good day for me. So everything is just fine. Thanks.
She really has carved herself out a beautiful reputation in this space.
Well
Speaking
deserved.
of someone who has carved out a beautiful reputation in this space, Michael Correa. He, of course, is the Director of Government Relations for the NCIA, and that's a fancy long title for basically being a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Michael, thank you so much for joining us here in 2022.
Hey, Jimmy, it's always great to be here on this rainy Friday in DC. I always enjoy it. Yes, this is the first time in 2022 I was able to be on the show. And hey, Chris, how's it going?
Great, Michael. Good to see you.
Hey,
sorry about the rain. Sorry about the rain you guys are having. Real sorry.
I know with the sunny, being from Southern California, you know, I understand 300 days of sunny weather a year. Like,
I know. Terrible,
I can't even, my brain can't even wrap itself around that, being from New England my whole life. Okay. I mean, I haven't even had a chance to look outside the window, but it started to ice when I got in here around 9:30 this morning. And I have no idea if we have snow out there, if we have rain out there, if we have ice out there, because I'm focused on this show right now.
You're a workaholic, Jimmy, workaholic.
Or sleeping in the studio again.
Some kind of a holic anyway. Michael, what's the latest? Because we know that the Safe Banking Act got a yay and got attached to another bill. And it was supposed to go to a floor vote perhaps today. Have you heard anything?
Yeah. So the Safe Banking Act was attached to another bill related to trade policy and other economic policies called the America Competes Act. And it passed earlier today, I think by maybe 5 or 10 votes, mostly along party line votes, because it dealt with trade with China and other things. And our wonderful friend, Ed Perlmutter from Colorado, attached it. Ed's persistent. He will attach the Safe Banking Act to any piece of legislation that's moving through Congress. So technically, this is the 6th time Safe Banking has passed the House of Representatives in the last 2.5, 3 years. 3 years.
And is it the 6th time the charm? It doesn't even rhyme.
So here's the thing. You know, it's not a matter of it passes the House and then it's dead in the Senate. It passes the House, and a lot of these bills are sitting in the Senate. And so it's up to the Senate. I mean, they could just pick and choose. Let's pick which safe banking bill we want to have. And so this is going to be yet another vehicle for it to happen. And nothing is stopping them from just bringing up safe SAFE was introduced in the Senate. Senator Jeff Merkley from Oregon has his own bill. Nothing is stopping them from bringing up any bills around SAFE. So to me, it's great. We love Ed. It's attached to another House bill, but at the same time, all the actions in the Senate, and until the Senate does something, it's going to be a broken record.
All right, well, I got to ask, Senate has are they actually working, the Senate? Because nothing's getting done, Michael. It's really frustrating right now to be an American citizen and know that every single progressive piece of legislation dies in the Senate.
Well, as a former House staffer for 15 years, we always used to say that the Senate is where our bills went to go die. And so it's not something that's ever different from the history of why it was set up. It's just a little more now we have the information, we have the news, it's right in front of us. It's obvious they can't function. And you sort of see that the Democrats can't even agree on 50 votes on anything, let alone getting 60 votes or let alone working. So it is a little frustrating, especially on the cannabis front.
I know Christopher has prepared a few questions for you, so I'm going to kind of throw it right over to him and let him take it for a few minutes. Go ahead, Christopher.
Michael, we were just talking about the idea that it's sort of a blue versus red, and where the bill is stuck now in the Senate seems to be stuck on party lines. And one thing I would love to hear you talk about, just to really sort of express to the audience, is how cannabis and the industry and the values and the benefits that cannabis has brought to states all across the country, how those values are actually consistent with conservative values, and how we can push this forward and get it out of this sort of party debate and really talk about the values of cannabis to both sides.
Well, one, that was one of the reasons why I joined NCIA and was brought in 9 years ago, was for my background on the Hill. And for someone who worked in Republican politics for 20 plus years, what is their rhetoric? What do they talk about? They talk about freedom. They talk about liberty. They talk about, states' rights, letting the states determine their policy. What better issue can you talk about than cannabis? That gets down to liberty, that gets down to freedom, that gets down to the states wanting to determine their own policy on cannabis. Ooh, wait, hold on. That's the one time Republicans don't believe in liberty, freedom, or states' rights. And it's very frustrating because that's one issue that you mentioned that completely aligns with their philosophies. And
that's what I think. Yeah.
As you've seen throughout the years, in the past few years, this is the most popular issue in any state. When this was in Florida on medical years ago, it was 70+%. It was the highest vote getter of any state ballot initiative or anyone running for statewide office in Florida. When Obama was on the ballot in 2012 in Colorado, it was more popular than Obama. In any state, in California, it was the leading vote getter. So the voters are well out in front of the policymakers in DC, but it doesn't run, historically, it ran in blue states, but you're seeing this in red states. You are seeing states around the union, southern states. The polling is very similar when you break down Democrats versus Republicans. This tends to be more of older voters versus younger voters, and older voters are holding on to those prohibitionist policies because they all grew up in a time where it was bad, whereas younger people, conservative or Democrat, have seen Colorado. I mean, Colorado's going on year 8 or 9 in legalization. And the world, it was like, oh, the world's going to end. The wheels are going to fall off. It didn't. Colorado has had a booming economy. Their tourism is great. Their budget's great. So there's nothing from a policy issue that's shown that this shouldn't be accepted. It's just along the lines of getting, and here's one big bit of advice. Republicans, they want to get elected and they go to the sugar daddies of funders. And one of the biggest sugar daddies on the right was Sheldon Adelson out of Nevada. And he made billions of dollars in casino gambling. And he and his wife, he passed away, but he and his wife basically ran a drug reform or a drug clinic to help kids with abuses. And they are totally anti-drugs. Well, if he's funding and that family is funding hundreds of millions of dollars on the Republican side, it's very hard for a future Republican to want to make some money and go to them and work up the party. And until until you get something that can counter that, it's really hard because, future Republicans are going to be looking at that and towing the line. And it's going to take a bit. The voters are coming around, the policymakers are coming around, but it's going to take a little bit before it's on par with what Democrats and the party goes through.
Sure. Yeah, that's got to be a daily thing. And it seems to be very true on the state level. Every time we read about a state like Wisconsin is just in the news, for example, right? Democrats push forward legalization, Republicans stop it. And I did a story recently sort of shooting down the Republicans saying, look at all you're missing for your state. Yeah. Next neighboring states, Illinois, Michigan, 16,000 jobs, 18,000 jobs. Illinois, what, $500 million worth of tax revenue now into the state, new tax revenue. So they don't have to tax their farmers. They don't have to tax their industry. They have new money, but they're not going for it. So this is an issue here.
I totally agree with you. I'll tell you a story. So I was in Montana in the summer, and I flew in and out of Spokane, Washington, which is on the eastern side. And there's a dispensary right on the border with Idaho. And I stopped by, and there were probably 40 cars in the parking lot. And I think 36 of them had Idaho license plates. And we know Idaho is probably the only state in the union that has doing nothing on cannabis. But even their constituents, like Idaho is just missing out from a tax base that they're giving to Washington State and other states because they don't want to admit that they consume cannabis, which consumers have been consuming cannabis for, decades. They've just been doing it hidden. And now you can bring it out. And this is an opportunity. You see in Mississippi, the state legislature has been working. You saw in South Dakota, these red states are passing these because the voters want it. And I don't think it's a partisan issue. I don't want to make it a partisan issue. But I want victories, and and until people wise up, it's going to be the Democrats are going to be leading on this and are going to be benefiting, and Republicans need to come around and embrace this because I think that they can neutralize the issue and go fight your wars on other wedge issues, like neutralize the cannabis issue.
I've said before that I think that one of the big mistakes that Donald Trump made on domestic policy is not legalizing cannabis. If he had done that, it would have shaken the race up in an unbelievable way. And he would have had such an advantage by being so bold. I mean, it would have been right on brand. It was bold. It was unexpected. It was, a breakthrough. It could have been, right? It was right there for him, and he didn't take it.
So, I'm a history buff and political history buff. We all know it was that anti-communist Richard Nixon that opened up trade with China. And why? Because he could. I totally agree with you. It was an opportunity for Trump to do something outside of what the norm was and to change the narrative. And he could have had that protection. Whereas Obama, I don't think could have legalized cannabis because he would have gotten crucified. Whereas a person like Trump on the right could have said, this is such a big issue. This transcends the party. And I'm going to take a big, gigantic, historic step. And it definitely, I had thoughts that maybe, in 2018 or 19 or 20, he would do something like that. It never materialized, but sometimes politicians aren't as bold as I would like them to be. And that was an example, but I totally agree with you.
I don't think they're bold at all. I think they're fence,
they're risk averse. They're risk averse, Jimmy.
Right. Exactly right. I just want to give a comment. We just got one of the nicest comments in our chat room that I think we've ever had from Renegade Knight. And basically he said, well, he loves our hard work and insight. You sound more legit than CNN or any news operation out there. That's the first time we've been compared to CNN. I'll tell you that. And they're leaderless right now.
I thought for a minute he was going to say, what a wonderful paint job my wife just did in the office. She loved the blue, but hey, I'll take the comparison to CNN.
That was very nice. And he said, what we really need to do is get weed in the hands of our governor, our senators, and have them chill out. Yeah. Actually, it's funny, Michael, one of the things, and I was talking about this earlier to somebody today, we both have heard, all of us have heard, cannabis has saved my life. Cannabis has changed my life. Are there any senators that have any family members that have had a good experience with cannabis as a strong medicine? Because sometimes that changes even the most hardcore prohibitionist.
No, I agree. And, NCIA just recently concluded our virtual lobby days. Normally we would do our in-person lobby days in DC. Maybe
I was there once.
You were there. You were there in May years ago. We haven't done it because the Capitol closed, because we're doing virtual. And one of the things I like to do is tell stories, have people tell stories that are relatable.
Right.
And it's not a theoretical, it's someone, because we all have kids, we all have siblings, we all have parents and grandparents that maybe have cancer or PTSD or some issue that they're benefiting from. And it's one of these things where if there's a story and there's a connection where the light bulb goes off and you're like, oh, wow, you benefit from cannabis. And it takes it away from the us versus them narrative that had been so true for like the 80s and many, many decades, that normal people don't consume cannabis. I've talked to a lot of people, politicians, and they will tell personal stories of something they witnessed, a family that came in, or someone, a relative, or even relatives who are in the industry. And so it is something that I think makes it more relatable for a lot of these politicians, and it destigmatizes it and makes it easier.
Yeah. Roger Stone, Trump advisor, and sort of general scoundrel, but came out pro-cannabis in the early days. And I thought that was really remarkable. But like you, I knew there must be a family connection. He admitted that, actually. He said that was why. A family member had cancer, yeah, and had survived well, and lived much longer and was comfortable. And he saw it with his own eyes, and he said, that's it. It's a good decision. And he went for it. It was completely against the party line. It was completely against, Jeff Sessions. It was against all that. And he said, I believe, I've seen it. I believe it. And I thought that could have been a breakthrough. We see John Boehner join in. We see William Weld join in. We see people like that. And we go, come on, more. Bring them over.
And that's the thing. It's going to take some time. And it's going to take those personal stories of, I look at, I'll give you an example of veterans. You're a veteran who served your country, and maybe you were injured permanently or mentally or physically. And the fact that the VA doesn't even think twice of addicting you to every known opioid, but hello, cannabis that could deal with pain, that could deal with mental issues. No, we won't even have that discussion. And the fact that you see people suffering, and that's the worst thing, is just seeing anyone suffer. And it really frustrates me that there's politicians out there that want to get between a person and their doctor, or a family member and their doctor. Like, that should just be between those two. And if one decides that plant-based medicine is the way to go, who should stop them? And it's really frustrating that there tends to be these prohibitionist politicians who are stopping them, which is sad. But hey, that's why they pay me, and why I'm fighting is to change these rules.
Well,
that's great.
We certainly appreciate that. Another reason that people get turned on to or get exposed to cannabis, unfortunately, is when it is a end of life issue, palliative care or hospice care. It almost seems to be like the last resort. If you can't get morphine, you can get some weed. And again, we see this a lot, but what are we going to do about that? Because unless these senators end up in hospice or palliative care, I don't think they're ever going to try this or even take the time to learn about it.
Yeah. And I like to tell the story. I'm not old enough to remember alcohol prohibition, but think about it, 80, 90 years ago, right? A politician sipping wine or drinking a beer at a reception would have been illegal during that time, but no one even thinks twice. Now, every politician goes to a reception, unless they're a teetotaler, throws back a drink or something. And the fact that cannabis could be viewed the same way, why would it be different? Now, I would love, Jimmy, to have my first politician come out. I think there was one recently. Maybe it was Nancy Mace that said she dealt.
Yeah, it was Nancy Mace.
Who used it to deal with some stresses and traumas in her life.
She was assaulted as a teenager.
We need more politicians coming out to say they personally used it and not have to worry about the blowback or the stigma for whatever reason.
Yeah. Well, we love the image of the gentleman in Louisiana who's running for Senate who decided to use the opportunity to smoke a joint on camera.
I want to get that guy to speak at our next conference. I'm definitely intrigued. The fact that he did that, I think, is wonderful.
It was great. It led our news. It went viral. Even George Jage said he would vote for this guy if he lived in Louisiana.
We all got to send him some money. We all got to send him some money.
And can I talk about money and politics for a second here? And I think people know that I'm on. You could probably guess which political party that I'm aligned with. Okay, but I'm not happy with it, and I'm going to explain why. Every day in my mailbox, I'm getting asked for money, $3, $10, $15, whatever it is. And I'm like, the Democrats seem to really embrace the dollar bill because all they want to do is spend it, it seems. That being said, I didn't give any of that money because I don't believe in giving money to politicians. I just don't. I think there are enough people out there. I think money corrupts the politicians. I think money destroys our values as a democracy. That's my opinion, of course. And but I thought I would at least be fair and taking a shot at the party because leave me alone. I mean, I know how to unsubscribe too, guys. Don't worry. But still, it is very frustrating, and you see it. I see it on a daily basis when I come in and I look at my emails and have to get rid of them all. So you
should try to be a lobbyist that everyone has your email list. I have 500 emails every day begging for money. So I know what it is. And, you can have your thoughts like you do on money in politics. It's there. It hasn't gone away. The Supreme Court has said it's legal. I don't think it's going away. And until some major change happens, it is what it is. And someone's giving them money, and those politicians are listening to those people. And what I've tried to do in the cannabis industry is to get our industry people more savvy when it comes to politics and how politics works. And money is not an end all be all. You don't dangle money in front of someone and then they change their opinion. But politicians need campaigns. They need campaign staff. They need advertisement. They need to do this. Those cost money. So for people to get elected and to be in these positions of power to affect change and do something, it's costly. And I want people, we look at our great friend like Ed Perlmutter, if he wasn't there, who would be fighting for us? And they're there. And that's where people should be embracing. You mentioned the guy in Louisiana. Okay. I mean, imagine if millions of people started giving him money and his coffers just blew up of the change he could do. So I'm not pessimistic on money. I mean, there's too much money from too few people, right? But at the same time, it's an opportunity for all of us to say, we really like this person. I'll use AOC as an example. Here she was working as a waitress,
bartender,
working as a waitress in a bar, something like that. And 4 years later, she's raking in millions of dollars because people assume, like what she's selling is affecting change. And that's I guess money is a way to show your excitement, on something like that. And
I guess so. Hey, and lastly, we're past the 420 bewitching hour on Friday. So if you're out there, enjoy. But I do want to ask one more question. There are rumors now, there's ripplings that the Chuck Schumer bill may actually get introduced in 2022. What are you hearing about that?
So we just talked with because we just concluded our lobby days this week. We talked with a lot of these Senate offices, and basically the main writers of this bill were in the Senate Finance Committee, and in the fall they spent because Chairman Wyden or Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon. Yep. Chairman, they're the main tax writers and did a lot of this writing. They were spending most of their fall on the Build Back Better program. And that was something that consumed a lot of the oxygen in DC with congressional staff. Their hope was that would have been passed in November or December, and then they could pivot to getting back to this comprehensive reform bill and then work through all the comments and details and then make an introduction. That, has been delayed. And so they are delayed. They had always hinted at dropping it maybe in the springtime. Right. And so I'm still holding them to springtime. We know Chuck Schumer loves media. And so why not around 420? So, I'm holding out hope, fingers crossed that they're going to get some people to drop it around April or something. But there isn't some secret plan to hold it. It's just a matter of bandwidth that their energy was on other issues in Congress. And they're getting around to it. And they did say when they drop it, they want to have a very thorough discussion on it. And that to me leads to hearings. And so there's an opportunity we're pushing, having maybe some hearings in the Senate in the later spring or summer to talk about this issue. Because trust me, I want them to drop this bill as soon as possible so we can see what's in it and what are the tax rates and what does the regulatory structure look like, so we can either support it or oppose it or bring our questions up. Because we gave 40 pages of responses to their questions. And NCIA, we want to be a thorough thought leader on some of these things and do what's right for the industry and be good lobbyists and advocates.
Well, there you go. And again, Michael, I appreciate your hard work in the trenches down there in DC. And I appreciate your commitment to our show, coming on and bringing us up to date on what's going on down there. I will say that the rest of this show, we're going to be turning over to women in the cannabis media space. So, and Christopher and I hope we'll just kind of sit back and let the women talk about what they have to face in the media. So I appreciate you coming on. I thank you again. We're going to take our 4:20 break a little late this afternoon, but we will be back on the other side after Jonathan Edwards sings one of my favorite songs, Shanty, Don't Go Away.
Hey, appreciate everything. Bye, guys.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. of my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on every night and day. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA studios.
Welcome back to the Green Rush live on a Friday afternoon. It's the cannabis business talk show that we run every Friday here at 4 p.m. Eastern time. We certainly hope that you will like, share, and subscribe to this show and all the shows that we produce here on Pro Cannabis Media. So happy to have Christopher Smith alongside as my co-host for this show. He, of course, does the American Cannabis Report. And I'll be honest, I don't even know if we're going to run one after. We usually run one of your shows, Christopher, after our news at the tail end of this, but I'm not sure we're prepared for that. Am I right, Dan?
Last week.
Yeah, last week we did.
Last week, next week. Yep.
Yeah, next week. Okay, fair enough. I just think it's a good slot for you anyway. We do have our news show that Christopher is a contributor to, and that will follow this live talk show at 6 p.m. And Elena Pinto anchors that for us, and we have 11 reports from different states all over the United States, including one from Europe on a weekly basis. I'm actually really proud of the fact that we've been able to make a pretty damn good news show out of all these contributors. Some have never been on camera before, and some are pros like Debra. So let's move on to our two guests in this half hour. One is Mona Zhang. She is a state's cannabis reporter for Politico. So Mona, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jimmy.
And also Tammy Puyear is here. Did I do it right?
You did. You got it.
And she's a contributor to Greenway Media. She's the co-president of JAINE, Jaine. Now, but rather than have me explain what that acronym is, Tammy, explain what JAINE is and how you got involved with it.
Sure. So JAINE is an organization that we founded for women in Missouri's cannabis industry. Missouri right now is a medical only state, and we have a lot of very powerful, very smart women who work in the various operations around the state. But we really wanted to come together and find ways that we could empower each other, as well as help other women get into the industry. So JAINE is an acronym for Join, Achieve, Ignite, Network, and Empower.
I love that. I love that.
We love it too.
That's fantastic. All right, Mona, tell us about Politico. I will say this. It was Deborah Borchardt who recommended you for this show, by the way, which I hope you will take as a compliment.
Yeah, very much so. I love Debra, and I always find, she's just so insightful in terms of her financial coverage of the industry. So Politico launched a cannabis policy vertical in 2019, which is how I got brought onto the team, where, Politico has over a dozen policy verticals, and cannabis is sort of like a small but mighty team, I would say. And I was really appreciative that a traditional news outlet like Politico would invest the time and energy to create a cannabis-focused team.
I just wonder if that's going to be a trend. I know I have reached out to my former comrades in the television news world, and they don't want to have anything to do with me and this subject, I might add. What are the barriers? What examples of a stigma barrier have you found in your pursuit of a story working for Politico?
I mean, I wouldn't say like we really face stigma. Are you talking about gender in specific?
Take your pick, but I was really referring to cannabis stigma.
Oh, okay. I mean, as Politico, we do have to be very unbiased in our approach to the topic. Mm-hmm. And so I do talk to advocates and sort of like all over the spectrum. And so it does involve cultivating sources who, a lot of sources are very anti-legalization. A lot of sources are very pro-legalization. So, the stigma is out there. I encounter it a lot.
Are we getting to middle ground by any chance? Have you seen any softening of either side?
Yes, for sure. And I think it is just a testament to the sort of like advancements we've seen in the past few years in terms of state level legalization. You have smart approaches to marijuana backing a medical cannabis bill in Nebraska, saying we don't believe cannabis is medicine, but we support this bill, stuff like that. It's definitely, you're seeing an evolution on that front.
Right. And Tammy, Missouri is never a dull moment. Am I right?
That's for sure. We're no Oklahoma, but we certainly have our nuances.
Would you like to show me or give me some examples? Sorry, that was a bad pun.
It's funny because I think every time a new market opens up, one of the things that seems to be the biggest deal is employment. And so there were some headlines in the press for a couple of days here in Missouri, because when you look at our Department of Labor statistics and how many people are employed in cannabis, it winds up that cannabis is now producing 1 out of every 10 available jobs in our state, which is a really big deal, and it shows really positive progress, but it also makes it very competitive.
Right. And actually, Christopher, there's probably no more competitive market right now than in California. Unfortunately, it's the legal versus the legacy market. Am I right?
That is definitely the biggest problem out here. Yeah. And speaking of, in Missouri, are medical products taxable? So is cannabis taxable in the medicinal market there?
We do. We have a 4% tax, and the proceeds from cannabis sales go to support veterans funds for Missouri.
Oh, that's a good use. That's nice.
Well, and it's interesting because, we're right between Oklahoma, which is a medical market, but significantly more players, more competition,
Right.
much lower pricing. But then we have Illinois on our east side, which is recreational and heavily, heavily taxed.
Right. Yeah, they're making a fortune in Illinois, aren't they?
They sure are.
They are. And that's obviously one of the greatest sales points that Michael Correa has to go when he talks to the politicians, because they're looking for answers to generate new revenue. And for some reason, they still don't see it in the cannabis plant. Mona, you said something I want to go back to. In the last, at least 10 years, maybe even 25 years, I have seen a change in the perception of media amongst the populace. For some reason, the populace likes to point fingers at the media. Doesn't matter which side you're on. It's like a common enemy of everybody. You said it's very important on Political to have even reporting, facts only, I'm guessing. How challenging is that in this space?
I think it's challenging in that, you have all of this. Research is limited, right? But anti-legalization advocates and pro-legalization advocates will take whatever data supports their argument and cite those studies. So as a journalist, it's challenging to sort of like sift through and be able to discern this study isn't really great, even though they're claiming that it says this, it actually has these methodological flaws, things like that, being able to think critically about claims that advocates are making. And at the same time, there's still this sort of like silliness aspect of cannabis. My colleague, Natalie Fertig, who's the federal cannabis policy reporter, she was on the Hill some months ago and went up to Bernie Sanders to ask him a question, introduced herself as a cannabis reporter, and he asked her, "Are you stoned?" And it's like people who report on the alcohol industry don't get asked if they're drunk when they're doing their jobs, So there's still this stigma or this perception with cannabis. Somehow it lacks seriousness as a subject. In reality, cannabis policy is so fascinating and it intersects with so many interesting issues, from finance to criminal justice. So we're still, developing.
Right. No, you mentioned research into the science of the plant, or research on the story that you might be writing on.
Oh, scientific studies on the plant. So, advocates will say, oh, look, these studies show that youth use has an increase after legalization. And then anti-legalization advocates will point to different studies that show the opposite.
Numbers and studies and what have you. Well, there's one thing that did happen this week we haven't mentioned, and Christopher, I know you know this story too. There's now 37 states that have medical marijuana programs, and the latest one is Mississippi, which, of course, if you know anything about the history of cannabis in the United States, was the only university that could actually study it for years, right? But they finally got it right.
For 50 years. Yeah. And what an unbelievable failure, right? I mean, amazing that the federal government kept this contract alive for 50 years and they produced no useful data whatsoever. Bad weed, bad research, bad science, but 50 years they kept pumping it in there. Amazing.
Well, it just reinforces everything that we've heard from the government when it comes to this product. You know, if you look at history, there have been at least 6 studies commissioned by the federal government of the United States since the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, LaGuardia, Schaefer Report, just to name 2. And they always come back with pretty much what we know. This is a pretty benign product. It does have medicinal value, though. It really shouldn't be a Schedule I drug. And again, it goes back to Nixon's Controlled Substances Act in 1971. I just hope at some point we will move towards federal decriminalization and opening the banks to the industry. Those 2 things alone, if that's the only 2 things that can happen at the political level, the whole industry will be celebrating. Christopher, am I wrong?
What were those? Banking was the second one. What's the first one?
Decriminalization. Just get it off that damn schedule. Okay. Get it off Schedule I.
Good. Because it was interesting to hear Michael talk about federal legalization, regulation, and taxation. And I thought, why do we need another layer of regulation? Right. Why do we need another layer of taxation? What are we doing? Why would they do that? But, you know, I actually wanted to also bring up an interesting thing. I think maybe, Mona, this is right for a question for you. I think one of the most interesting people in the whole cannabis space right now is Nora Volkow.
Yeah, she is interesting because I agree, because she has been, you know, saying more, I wouldn't say positive comments about cannabis, but like less negative comments than you would expect out of the director of NIDA.
At least balanced, right?
Yeah.
Balanced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
And she is such a total, I just did a little bit on her recently. I mean, what a rock star as a scientist. You know, she's produced hundreds of peer-reviewed papers and everything. I mean, she's one of the most well-respected scientists of any kind, you know, around the world. And she is now, like, the glacier is breaking. And even she is saying, like you said, more balanced things.
Right. Absolutely. And then you also have someone like, you know, Becerra as the head of HHS, which, and like all of these agency heads, you know, Ann Milgram as the head of the DEA, these are people who are less anti-cannabis than their predecessors.
Right.
Well, let's hope that continues and they actually get something done. So I'm just, and yes, I agree with you, Christopher. Why do we need more regulation? Why do we need more taxes? It's very simple. They're in politics. The federal government is a huge business. They're not going to leave money on the table. Now, they shouldn't be asking for, what was the ridiculous federal tax that's in Schumer's bill, 25%?
25% on top of what already exists. In California, it's already 45%. Give me a break.
No. Small increments will be good. If the advocates will accept decriminalization and opening the banks, the federal government could still put in some kind of a federal tax, but it can't be 25%, or the industry is just going to go back to the legacy market again. And then what's law enforcement going to do? They're going to go tracking down that again. That, to me, is one of the biggest drivers for this. Law enforcement does not want to deal with cannabis crime anymore because the prosecutors don't want to prosecute it. Am I right? Anybody? Bueller?
Seems to me. I would agree.
Some law enforcement still really want to deal with cannabis.
I agree with you, Mona.
Unfortunately, yeah.
I agree with you, Mona. It's an easy arrest for them. It's an easy peasy arrest, right?
Well,
they love it.
Oh, I see. So what you're saying is humans like to take the easy way out.
I know. Strange.
I laugh, but it's like, there's a lot of movement amongst different sides on this besides the policy and the issues. There's the humanity issue. That's why I keep going back to, and I'm not going to say, wouldn't it be great if a member of the Senate on the other side had a sick relative and then found that cannabis could cure or help that person. I don't wish that on anybody. I want to make sure you understand that. But those stories are very powerful. And those are the stories that you hear from people who say, cannabis saved my life. Cannabis changed my life. I was an anti-weed person. I grew up in the dare world. And, now I've been enlightened. I'm starting to hear more and more of those stories, but I do want to get back to our media discussion. Tammy, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to finding a story in Missouri that is worth writing about and people will care about?
I think it depends on who the audience is. When you're writing for a publication like Greenway, that is a Missouri publication. And so it's really easy to find lots of things that Greenway industry readers and Greenway patients want to read. I think when it becomes a challenge is when you're writing for a national publication. When I've done freelancing for other publications, it's a much broader audience. And so the things that I write about have to be much more broad, that are encompassing of all the different things that are happening around our country or the globe. And so I think it's a little more involved in terms of comfort, and certainly more involved in terms of research. Plus, I don't know if Mona experiences this as well, but there are certainly a lot of content topics that are recycled quite a bit, that we get in our feeds. And so while you might feel like what you're writing is very groundbreaking or is new news, within a couple days when your feed spot comes in, there's 10 other publications that have suddenly run with it too.
Yeah. Look, the news cycle has changed for everybody in every media, right? I mean,
significantly.
Where do you guys find, if you're doing a story on the impact on people who have muscular MS, multiple sclerosis, okay, and the effects that cannabis has on that? Where would you go? Where are your resources? But I mean, everybody knows you can Google anything and get any answer. Do you start with Google, Mona? Is that where you start?
Not anymore, ever since. So I used to be a freelancer before I joined Politico. And so I didn't have like the resources of a newsroom behind me. Mm-hmm. Now that I'm at Politico, it is really great because I can get, embargoed copies of studies before they get released to the public. You develop relationships with communications staffers at, whatever you're covering, you can get like a heads up on stuff. So that's kind of what we use or what we rely on to stay ahead of the news rather than like seeing something on Google and like, regurgitating it.
Right. Gotcha. Well, I've been in TV for years. We'd love to regurgitate. That was a joke, Chris. You're supposed to laugh at that.
Trying not to regurgitate myself. Thank you.
All right. For what I'm saying.
Yes.
All right. Chris, you got anything? Because I know I got more here on my paper, but if you have something you'd like to ask, go ahead.
I'm always interested to hear what people who are really, really strong professionals in the business or in our in our world think about the idea of champions in cannabis. I'm curious about what kinds of people, but even what specific people that you would turn to as real resources or as real sort of a spokesperson for the industry, someone who has got a strong and authentic background and someone who really is a good champion for the cause. I always think that one of cannabis's biggest downfalls is that we haven't had one. So I'm always curious to see who you think really could step up.
Great question.
I'll field that one first and give Mona a chance to think because she'll probably have a very different answer than I do. Okay. One of the things that I find kind of frustrating, especially in a state that's newly legal, is that there's a tendency for people to think that we're groundbreakers when in fact we were the 32nd state or the 38th state or whatever the case may be. And I think that there's kind of a less of a highlight on the people that helped bring us here. So what I call the Cannabis Pioneers, I'm thinking in terms of Brownie Mary and Jack Harrer and people like that. Those are the people that brought us to where we are today. They really started the movement. And so when I look around today, a lot of the people that I think I look up to are the ones that I think are not just viewing cannabis as the green rush, but are truly using it to make changes and right wrongs. Part of my own interest in cannabis has always been wanting to have something that I could actually contribute to righting what I feel like was a wrong many, many, many years ago. But I think if we look at people like Nancy Whiteman from WANA, as a woman in cannabis, she is certainly someone that I look up to. There's some very strong women. Dr. Sue Sicily, I think, is easily one of my favorite poster children for this movement.
Isn't Kim Rivers from True Leaf, and isn't she the CEO of True Leaf?
Another one, yeah. And there's a lot of strong women that I would point out that I think are good champions. The ones that I think are going to help make the most impact are the ones that continue to champion not just being women in the industry, but all of the things that we want to fight as cannabis advocates, whether it's decriminalization and expungement and things like that. I think we have a lot of them to look at, and some of them are very focused on one or two things. Some of them, are very focused on a couple really big initiatives, but there are a lot of professionals. But I think, to the point that Mona made earlier, the ones that we see highlighted in mainstream media are always the bad guys in cannabis. It's always people being publicized that I think further the stigma than others, as opposed to showing all the good that we're doing as professionals and all the nonprofits that benefit from cannabis.
You do know the saying, if it bleeds, it leads, in TV, right?
I have heard that, yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's the sensational part of that story. It's a shocking news story to get the attention of the audience. And then as the news show continues, the news gets softer and softer. It's always why I was at the end doing sports right before the kicker, which is the really light, feel good, leave you with a positive thing. But for the most part, that is built into the news mantra at the television level. I'm only concerned about the television level here at this point, Colleen. But Mona, you can answer Chris's question too. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. In terms of like my own personal cannabis journalism hero, I definitely have to say Amanda Chicago Lewis. Her work was really inspiring to me early on in my career. And I just I quit my full-time job to start freelancing on the cannabis beat because it was something I really was passionate about. And her encouragement really helped me stick with it. And there are a lot of other journalists out there who are just keep going, because the freelance game is hard, and I thought about quitting numerous times, and they're like, you're gonna get there, just keep trying. So really appreciate all the support of journalists. And to Tammy's point, in terms of champions in cannabis, do you guys know Graham Boyd?
I don't.
Okay, so he is the founder of New Approach, and he used to be an ACLU lawyer, but he was basically the sort of one of the minds behind figuring out how to run a successful ballot initiative to legalize marijuana. And people like him are they don't have PR people. They're not out there talking to the press. They're working behind the scenes and really developing the playbook, the advocacy playbook of how do you do this successfully? How do you message this to get people to vote for it? And so, people like him who are working behind the scenes, I think are the champions as far as advocacy is concerned.
That's really great. That's great to hear.
I think
it's so important. I think it's so important to say those, to keep saying those names, right? To keep shouting out those names of those people who, like you said, Tammy, helped get us here, and helped kind of carry the load for such a long time through prohibition and through the sort of darkest days. And then who really needs to be heard today. And I just think this is an important conversation we should just continue to have amongst ourselves and then keep spreading the word. I think it's important.
Agreed.
Absolutely. All three of you guys are writers and journalists in one capacity. Has there been a story that you've written that you always say, damn, I'm really glad that I'm in the media to tell this story? Is there anyone out there? Christopher, I'm going to start with you first, if you don't mind.
No, not at all. No, I'd be happy to. The story that actually made me an advocate at all was a fellow that I met at a conference. His name is Boone Cutler, and he was a U.S. Army paratrooper who parachuted into Iraq. He got hit by a mortar and was injured very, very badly. He had 13 surgeries at Walter Reed. He was addicted to opiates. He was a total mess. He got Parkinson's disease from the blast, his brain shutting around in his skull. He was a total mess. He, however, recognized what he needed to do, that he needed to get out, first of all. And then he was brave enough when the VA said, no, we're not going to let you out. You need to stay on our drugs. We're not letting you do cannabis because that's illegal and we're not dealing with it. He was strong enough to push ahead and get himself out of Walter Reed. He's now a full cannabis advocate. He started a hemp company in Colorado. So meeting him and meeting a guy who had literally been through the grinder completely changed my life. Honestly, I must say, completely changed my life.
What a great story.
Yeah. He's an incredible guy. Yeah.
And I'm guessing each one, Tammy, do you have one that comes to mind?
Yeah, but I'm kind of loath to follow Chris, because those stories that he was just mentioning are the ones that are so, they really stick with you. My first Greenway cover was actually, I think, my favorite, not just because it was my first cover, but because I wrote about Dr. Mimi Vo, who is a cannabis clinician here in Missouri. She has been very instrumental in moving things forward in terms of legalization, but she also is a tireless advocate for trying to get more clinicians to seek out and educate themselves about the medicinal benefits of the plant. Mm-hmm. And, when COVID hit in particular, this is a woman who has twins at home, of full-time family responsibility, but was seeing 50 patients a day through COVID. Wow. And still being able to maintain and encourage all of these things about cannabis that she found were so important. She participated with Missouri's trade association, MoCan Trade. She participated in creating a training that gives clinicians CME credit. Her and a lot of the other physicians that we have in our community here came together and put together this amazing training. But her passion for the patient and her passion for making sure that she spreads the word to other traditional medical practitioners is extremely inspiring to me.
Wow, wonderful. Wonderful.
That's great. All right. Last but not least, Mona, I know you have one, I'm sure.
Yeah, the story that looms large in my mind from this past year, at least, was I wrote a story about medical marijuana caregivers in Maine. And
was Uncle Pete? Did you meet Uncle Pete?
I did not.
Oh, well, I'll finish your story and then we'll give a quick Uncle Pete. Go ahead.
Yeah. But as you know, there's a lot of talk in the industry and in the policy world about big marijuana versus small businesses. And Maine's caregiver system is so unique in that 75% of the medical marijuana is sold by small mom and pop shops. Right. There isn't another market like that. Right. But of course, they're also being threatened by overregulation and taxes and increased costs of compliance. So it was really great to be able to, talk to those caregivers, explore that market, see people just growing, having small grows, in their gardens and stuff. And I really hope that, people can look to that for policy ideas for how do you go about regulating cannabis to facilitate, small business and that kind of stuff.
Great. Awesome. And Christopher, it's very interesting because you and I talked about the California scene this week on a call. And, what's happening in Maine is here they had a system that was working similar to the system that was working in California before the adult use came in, right?
Yeah.
Right. And now the regulations and the rules and the outside operators have come in and they've screwed it up, if you will, or at least they've upended what was working so well. And I think that's a lesson that perhaps other states can learn. If you've got something that's working, try to figure out a way to improve that, or at least not make it so difficult that they have to go under, or they have to change their rules and they're not able to do what they were doing and had been doing just because of this. Again, it's all about regulation and tax. Everybody wants a piece of the cannabis pie, or the cannabis bud in this case, I guess. Guys, both of you were so terrific. This was a great conversation. I love talking about the media anyway, because after all, that's where most of my career has been. So Mona, how do people get in touch with you? If you have a story and you want to share it on Politico, how do people get to Mona Zhang?
Yeah, well, my information is out there. I'm on Twitter. It's my last name, first name, Mona-Zhang.com, and LinkedIn. I mean, you can find me everywhere, and my email is online, so easily reachable.
Good. Well done. And who is it? Oh, it was Fred last week. He gave out his cell phone. I was like, okay, great. Tammy, how about you? How do people find you?
They can reach me at tammy@mogreenway.com. or find me at wearejaine.com.
There you go. Well, that's a great thing. And both of you, thank you so much for coming on and enlightening us a little bit about what it's like to be a beat reporter in the cannabis space. We've got a couple of more coming on after this break. Don't go away. We've got, Jackie Bryant's coming on, Christopher. So let's just leave it at that. I know you guys are regulars in Clubhouse, so we'll be back with more Green Rush Live after this. Don't go away.
I'm a fan.
That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free.
If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or...
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it could make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems. Whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. Welcome back to the Green Rush Live, our regular cannabis business talk show on Friday afternoons here on Pro Cannabis Media. I'm Jimmy Young. I tend to be here on different shows whenever I got the opportunity to do it. And we always encourage people who are watching us perhaps for the first time to like, share, and subscribe to our content. Last year was a great year for Pro Cannabis Media as far as our growth, with over 400,000 views of our videos and 8,630, I think, subscribers on YouTube in 1 year. And that is something we are very, very proud of. But we really think that next year, this year, if you will be our best one yet. And we are starting with a great new show called Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. And yes, that is her real name. She's been a regular on High Times TV doing the Grow House show on that particular outlet. And she is going to be joining us live on Wednesday night, February 9th, which is only a few days away now, at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we have some great guests lined up, a few coming in from Humboldt County in California for an incredible conference that's actually in Massachusetts at the starts a week from today in Sturbridge, Mass. So there's the shameless plugs. I want to welcome back Christopher Smith, who's been our wonderful guest host for the time being. And Debra, just so you know, I told him he had big shoes to fill. Okay. I just want you to know. All right. Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report and Crane Media is with us. Debra, great to see you as always.
Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
And I also welcome a friend. I'm going to call you a friend, Ann, if that's okay.
Of course.
Ann Brum from A Joint Venture Co. And before I introduce Jackie Bryant, I do want you to give us a little opportunity to hear about what you're doing in this space and what you have done over the last year or so.
Thank you. I was going to go on and on, but the last year has been interesting as public facing is coming back on the scene in spite of post-COVID and the Omicron variant. I think last year really showed that human beings want to be physically together. But last year we were quite busy on some brand development projects, and naturally media is a major component to our suggestion and strategy when it comes to our clients' brand development. I also got a chance to help out with Jimmy at the CWC Expo with some interviews, like with CJ Wallace, the Think Big Foundation, and where else did we go, Jimmy? What was
there was the interview with the New York regulator, but we don't want to talk about that, do we, Ann?
I mean, she is going to be great.
She was going to be great, but we learned a very valuable lesson about backpack journalism. That's all I'm going to say.
Pretty much. Right? I am not I would say I'm more of a grassroots storyteller, and I take that in. I'm not a formally trained journalist by any means, but absolutely we do find value in storytelling, and naturally with the plant's history, it has been passed down traditionally through storytelling, through peoples and cultures sharing their benefit from the plant. So I definitely feel like multimedia is here to stay, and it's also here to help eradicate the stigma, normalize this, and get this into people's consideration of utilizing this traditional plant medicine. But yeah, so Brum, founder of Joint Venture Co., we're based in New England. We coin ourselves as a growth agency, and we work with cannabis and wellness brands and expanding their footprint and mission in the East Coast region. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
All right. And last but certainly not least, Jackie Bryant, a longtime freelance journalist out in California. And I'm going to just give the quick story, Jackie, and then I'll come to you. We get to talk about what you're doing now. I found a story she wrote about my favorite food. Okay. My favorite food is lobster. I grew up in New England. Okay. And I'm fascinated by the fact that she wrote about, and I think it was in Vinyl Haven, Maine too, which is also kind of an amazing story, but they were getting the lobsters high. Okay. They literally were getting the lobsters high. And I was like, I had no idea that lobsters could get high. And that's what intrigued me. I thought it was really well written. I tracked you down, found your newsletter, and now I'm just so happy that you're back on our show here and we can talk more. So Jackie, what are you doing now, especially with Weed Week and Alex Halpern?
That's a great question. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm a freelance journalist in San Diego. I do a lot of work with Weed Week. We are launching a newsletter at Weed Week at first based on the California market. It's kind of an underserved market, if you can believe it, with a certain type of journalism. So we're kind of like seeking to fill that in the B2B space. I also am a regular at MJ Biz Daily, Forbes, Uprocks, where I do product stuff, Voice of San Diego. Oh God, any publication with the word leaf in it or weed, I've probably written for. A Different Leaf there in Massachusetts. I'm a regular contributor there. Pretty much everywhere.
we like Michael Cusack as the editor there, and I think he's done a great job with that. And I'm pretty sure they've expanded now to other states, which is very cool.
Nationwide now, actually, which is really excited as of the fall. Yeah.
Have you ever been on? Oh, I think you were on with Brit Smith, weren't you?
I was. Yeah. I went on with her last fall to talk about the science of edibles and basically just give a primer of, what happens in our bodies, the chemical process, because if you understand that, it's a lot easier to understand how it's going to work for you, right? So that's kind of demystifying that process for people.
Right. And that's what it's all about. All right, let's get back to Debra real quick here, because I think in a lot of ways, a lot of people look up to you, and you're almost like, and I don't want to, it has nothing to do with your age. Okay. You're a senior correspondent. You're right. Okay. You look beautiful. It doesn't matter what your age is. It's only a number. Okay. Says the 64-year-old old white guy on this set. Right. Tell me about the challenges that you've had to face as a female journalist in the cannabis space.
Well, I would say up until the acquisition with Crane, the big thing that we faced was trying to get capital. And I found it really frustrating because some of the companies that had given capital to other cannabis media properties, which had the same business model, when I talked to them, they would kind of turn their nose up at, how do you, what's your revenue model, blah, blah, blah. And I would tell them, and I would give them numbers, and they would always kind of scrunch up their face and say, well, and then they would turn me down. And it was so frustrating because some of those properties that they had invested in are now belly up, and they spent millions on them. And yet when I was going to the exact same people and saying, if you've already invested in media, I've got my property and we're doing really well, and got turned down. And so there could be no other reason other than gender. It just, there was no, other excuse. But ultimately I eventually did prevail by just sticking close to my mission and continuing to deliver a really solid product, week after week, month after month, and then year after year. So
I think I've told you this story about when I asked Bruce Linton, why is it that properly capitalized media companies have failed? And we can name 2 or 3 right off the bat. I know we can. And he said, because they weren't media companies. They were event companies or something else trying to do media. And Debra, you were a journalist from day one, and you were doing media with the Green Market Report and creating a following. And as we all know on this show, It's eyeballs. How many eyeballs? How many times? It's audience, reach, and frequency. That is the product of what media does, which is just a conduit for information. So I find it interesting that you too have had to deal with that a little bit too. And now you're with Crane. How has your life changed with that?
Well, I get a regular paycheck, so that's
there you
nice.
go. I set you up.
No, and in fact, I've been on calls all day today because we're about to announce our first event for 2022, which is going to be a women's business summit in New York City on April 28th. So it's really nice to have a team of people where now I have somebody that's doing my graphics, and then I have a call about the setting up the registration and setting up the we're also doing a women's leadership awards, so we'll have nominations and follow the path that Cranes has done with many of their famous awards like 40 Under 40 and such. So now I have this whole infrastructure behind me to help me do these things, and then we'll have people can nominate people for these awards, and then we'll have 10 awards and we'll give them out at the event. So it's super exciting to have all these people in there. So nice. I can't get over how nice they are, and they're all willing to help me. And I'm just thrilled that, I mean, it's only February, and I feel like 2022 is just, we're just going to be off to the races and crush it. So I'm really excited about all this.
Good. Well deserved. Terrific. Christopher, I know you've got questions for these three superstars in the journalist world. Go ahead.
Well, it's hard not to be intimidated to be in this company, first of all. So thank you very much for having me, I must say. A question that I think I asked earlier, I guess I'm a little bit stuck on this idea just because it's something I'm trying to solve in the industry and my thinking overall, is talking about champions in the business and talking about people that you look up to or look to, not necessarily look up to, but look to. They may be current people who you might look to for information. You might look to for a direction that a policy is happening. You might look to for as an example of someone who's doing a company right or doing some initiative right. And I'm curious who you see out there. And clearly, you know, as we were talking earlier, you know, that I would love to hear about women in the industry that you really feel are standing strong and you would like to call them out.
All right. So let's start with Jackie and then we'll go across. Go ahead, Jackie.
How about it, Jackie?
So one area where I think women are doing a good job in the industry is very much on the social equity forefront. I think you'll find that many of the loudest and proudest activists in favor of racial justice in cannabis are frequently women. And I do find that women tend to make good activists because I don't know. It just sort of seems like there's a communication there that works out in certain gendered ways, to be perfectly honest. And so you'll see a lot of that. There's no doubt that there are a lot of women CEOs coming up in the space as well, which was, you know, I'm going to decline to single anybody out just because I don't want to seem like I'm playing favorites or anything, but don't compromise.
I will. Jamie Pearson from Bang is my favorite CEO, and she's a woman. I'll be perfectly honest.
And a great company that has a lot of longevity in an industry where it's incredibly hard to find longevity. And so I think that that's notable too. I also feel like there is, with more women coming up in the industry, which is notable because up until very recently, you know, really, if you were working in the cannabis industry as a woman, you were probably a trimmer. You were probably in support of a man's role in some way, whether you were taking care of his kids or trimming his weed, or you weren't in the front. And that has really only changed in the last decade, to be perfectly honest. So it's kind of incredible to even see women, you know, work at companies in any kind of business role, let alone be a CEO. So I think that that's really important too. And I think that they're also helping to usher in an era of maybe more compassionate capitalism that recognizes that companies in the space also, you know, need to try to give back rather than just try to make money. So that's kind of my 2 cents on where women are fitting into the industry right now.
And I love that last point. Compassionate capitalism, I think, is so critical moving forward. That's a great point. Thank you.
And go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's something to be said of we know we need to be profitable to be operational, but it's another thing to be purpose driven as far as where that profit is coming from and having those two worlds align up. I also too don't want to play phase, but I'm definitely going to shout out some ladies and although I don't know any, haven't I'd love to see some space for non-binary and women identifying to make a move in a leadership position within this space and be a voice and representation of those communities. And I'm happy we mentioned Brit Smith. She, I think, is doing a wonderful job with the Different Leaf podcast and being inclusive of a range of information and tapping in on a lot of different topics when it comes to the culture of cannabis overall. On the medical side, I think the Knox family is doing really wonderful things. They're unbelievable, strong women that are spearheading cannabis education, access for patients, and especially for communities of color. So shout out to the women of the Knox family. Chula Menley, who founded the brand, and her business partner, who I don't remember right now. I think what they're really doing. What's that?
Correia.
Yeah. Those two, what they're doing with the brand, the values, the stories that they're sharing, and the quality and integrity of the products are really amazing. Strong, beautiful, gracious is some of the things that come to mind when it comes to those strong leaders. Tahira, and I'm going to butcher her last name. Yes. Kudos to her. Out in NYC. She's always been kind, considerate, and acknowledged when we're coming up in conversations and seeing each other. So I acknowledge that. And also to Sasha and Liz, who put on the Stone Age in New York City. That was a big risk, and them putting all of it together to bring a cannabis immersive experience together is pretty amazing. So shout out to them. And then lastly, my business advisor, Jessica Guerin, and I wouldn't be where I am without her dream crushing, as she says, scope on being a leader and having a great business, but she's very encouraging. So at the same time, she keeps it real, but so those just to put it out there. And then some of my sisters.
There you go. That's nice. That's nice. So one of the kind of, I would say, an ugly.
Wait, what about Deborah?
Well, Deborah, go ahead. You can answer this question too. Go ahead, Ann. Yeah, but go ahead, Deborah.
You know, I guess I would shout out to some of the people that have been supportive of me through this process, starting out with a website that, to your point, Jimmy, it does take time to build up a following, even if you are a known property before you start. And, you know, I have to say, like, Rosie Matteo has been a huge supporter, and we've watched each other grow. She was a one-man band 4 years ago. Now she has 60 employees. I would also say Jessica Billingsley from Ekerna. You know, Jessica was one of the first female CEOs of a cannabis tech company on the NASDAQ and still remains in that position. And both of those women have supported me when I was really struggling and starting out, and given me lots of help and support. And I really thoroughly appreciate that. And Gia Marone at Women's Grow, all three of them have been amazing. And I think that's the difference, is helping people when they're on their way up, not waiting until they're up there.
And Chris, I know you and I have talked about this already. I'm going to throw it out. This is the perfect time for it. So there is kind of an ugly statistic that has been following the cannabis industry over the last, I think, 4 or 5 years. 4 or 5 years ago, 27% of C-level management positions were held by women, and now it's down to 8%. And is that because that the old boys network control equity in this country more than anything else? And I'll ask Jackie, you go first.
Yes. So actually, one company that I kind of did want to shout out that I realized after I spoke that I hadn't, that I think speaks to this, is Garden Society. They're a California-based company. They make pre-rolls, gummies, chocolates, a couple of other things, but they just closed a Series A of $7 million, which doesn't really seem like a lot, but in this funding environment and in California, and it seems that they have a strategy of very slow, controlled growth. It's actually really notable that they're getting money, and the way that they're doing it and deploying it shows a very smart strategy. And pretty much anybody getting money right now, you can pretty much sniff out that means that they're legit. That means that they have good management in place, and that's a just solely women, owned and operated company. But it's interesting because they're one of many. But there of many companies that have received funding recently, but really one of the only women helmed, other than maybe a few here and there. So I think that that's really notable. That it's just really hard for women to access capital. And these are old boys networks, both in capital networks, but also in cannabis networks. I see it, I see it in my sourcing every day. I had to work really hard to bridge not only the legal, but the illegal market, the space in between, and also the misogynist attitudes in there. So it's like finding access to capital and like even sourcing in the same way. You're trying to get to the top, but you're not in that room if you're a woman. So like either way, you have to sort of ingratiate yourself and try to find a way and just even be where the conversation is happening so you can be offered those things. So I would say that's part of it. I would also remind people that cannabis is federally illegal still. And in certain places, if you are a woman with children and you have cannabis anywhere in your life, it actually can be a detriment and it can be a problem with family services and stuff like that. Historically, that's a huge reason why women haven't even been in the industry, period. So there are some women who are, understandably like keep that mum. And I think that that's a big reason why there aren't more advancing in certain spaces as well. We don't really make it easy for women to be out with their use.
I would also argue too that the industry has changed a lot. So 7 years ago, when really Colorado and California, Washington, and Oregon were the only adult use legal states, you had a situation where a lot of the men were not willing to risk their livelihood. And if they were the breadwinner of the family, they didn't want to take that chance of leaving the traditional workspace to take a risk on cannabis. Whereas women, because they weren't going anywhere in the traditional workspace, they found that cannabis was their way up, their ladder up to the top. So, 7 years ago, they weren't competing with as many men from the traditional industries. Fast forward to today, and now half the press releases come out, go, oh, we hired Joe from Apple and we hired Jim from Google. And it's become this race to hire these people from these, blue chip names, and they've kind of muscled the women out of the way. And that's kind of where I've seen a lot of that change. Not to say that there aren't still plenty of women, climbing, but once you start to get into that C-suite area, it's really hard for them to want to take a chance on someone that hasn't already performed that role. And so that's where you're getting into publicly traded companies. It's a whole different skill set. So it's really just going to take time. And then I think too, you get founder fatigue. You get people that have been grinding for years. And when someone offers them a chance out, it's just very tantalizing to take the money and say, you know what, I need a break.
Hey, and that's how we all felt about you, Deborah. Okay.
And I know we're talking about like here in the States, but I think globally outside of the States, I have colleagues that are in higher C-level executive and up positions. So I think maybe just in the States, it's a little different compared to what I'm learning for colleagues in South Africa or Berlin or the UK, where there's just a different mindset collectively as a culture from what I'm understanding in their experience, but still pretty male dominated.
Yes. Christopher, you got any defensive mechanisms in your brain?
None. No, none at all. In fact, like I said in the beginning when we were first talking, I kind of expected the slings and arrows to come toward the white guys in the room, because that's what's blocking the progress so often. So and I think the criticism is well deserved, frankly. And I would guess you would think that it's even worse these days with all the consolidation and multi-state operators that are getting bigger and bigger and eating the world kind of thing. Is this problem getting worse, or maybe will it provide an opportunity because they are bigger companies? Perhaps they're more evolved and therefore their corporate social responsibility metrics and requirements are going to actually change things for the better. Do you think there's any opportunity that change may happen?
I I would say that's already happening to some extent, right? For certain. You can just look at the ranks but again, back to Deborah's point about the C-suite, there really are only so many people who have performed at that level, as she put it. So when you get into that category, it's just lateral moves all over the place, right? And especially in an emerging industry, you want the legitimacy that coming from a blue chip or another industry is going to give you. So that at the top, that's just going to take time. I don't know that anything fixes that other than time and or someone taking a really big risk or chance and maybe pissing off their shareholders by appointing somebody who doesn't necessarily have the management experience. So that's going to be a time thing. But I do think down the line, and maybe MSOs that are traditionally hiring from other corporate arenas, I think that's a good point. Like they're more likely to intentionally bring women into the fold. Whereas if you have, let's say, like a big California company that's licensing in other states, but they came from the traditional market, there's probably not too many women working for that company already, to be perfectly honest. So it is a good point.
And Christopher, I think it's worth mentioning too, the salary issues. I was part of a team that prepared a bunch of white papers for the NCIA on gender and women in cannabis. And there were several series of these white papers, and you can find it on their website. But one thing that I had found while I was doing my research for the paper was that the women CEOs were often paid less than the male CEOs. And a great example of this, and it's a great example because you could actually track it. But High Times was paying their male CEOs far more than what they offered Stormy Simon for the 4 months that she was the CEO of that company. And she was also on the board before she was named the CEO. But when you actually compared, and it was apples to apples, you could compare this CEO pay to that CEO pay. The men, of course, they've had 4 CEOs in 4 years, but the men were always paid more than the women. And so that's also a real frustrating situation because you've got these women that are taking on a huge amount of responsibility as a CEO and not getting paid as much. And even in traditional industries, CEO jobs, to Jackie's point, it's almost like quarterbacks in the NFL. You're rotating the same group of people through the CEO job, and the CEO job has a shorter lifespan. So the problem that you get into that is, okay, so I become CEO, but now the clock is ticking and I'm probably only going to be CEO for, who knows, 2 to 4 years.
Right,
so
probably.
And then you're back out into the open again and looking for another CEO job. So I think for a lot of women, they prefer to, they'd love to be in the C-suite and be CEO, but then that kind of, churn and burn is not very attractive.
What do you think about Jamie? Sorry about that. I'm so sorry.
No.
There's always been this comment about the cannabis industry being kind of a bro industry, right? The old stoner guy, the Cheech and Chong guy, right? The banana, pineapple espresso, all that. There's all that, but and true, right? But it seems to me that that the real benefits of cannabis are really actually skewing much more toward female values and female needs anyway, right? That the opportunity may be in that direction as well. I don't know. Do you think that that's true, or are we stuck with bro bong hits all for the rest of our lives?
Well, it's interesting. There's some truth to that. I think it's less gendered. It's gendered in the way that women have been socialized to consume drugs in a certain way, which more often means they don't consume, right? is kind of how it's ended up. But I mean, I personally have 10 bongs at my house and I dab every day, and I'm a pretty hardcore consumer, but I'm also very much, I identify as a woman, right? But at the same time, I'm probably an outlier. But am I an outlier because I'm an outlier, or am I an outlier just because I stepped out of line and figured some stuff out, right? So I think we're going to see over time, consumption habits and where they fall in line and where they change as access continues. But I do think, to your point, marketers are making a huge bet that there is something different to the way that women consume. And that may be because it's inherently different or that they were socialized. But either way, it is true and the numbers bear out. There is just a different way, lower dose products, products that are more designed for sleep, things that are just a little bit more feminized, even in the accessories category. Like even for women who dab, there are like cuter dab tools now that are just a little bit, they're just nicer. They're more stylish. They're just not as ugly, frankly. And so I think it's a question of like, is it inherent? Is it socialization? That's a whole other conversation, but marketers are betting on it, and you do see it, and you see it in the numbers. And in fact, I think one of the fastest growing categories of new users is women over 55. That's a marginalized group in cannabis consumption that no one has really ever paid attention to. And for the first time marketers, there are brands dedicated to it, like Hello Again. So yeah, I kind of like rambled around, but like I think we'll see more women taking up more hardcore routes of consumption, dabbing, smoking more flower. But I also think we'll see a lot more women hanging out in like the lesser consumption. And there's going to be a lot of products dedicated towards making that happen.
Nice. Great.
Well, we're definitely up against it. I think I've got two more really intelligent, beautiful women in the waiting room. And we want to get to them too, just to be fair. Deborah, you are invited to stay if you'd like, because you were invited to be the guest host at the beginning of this venture.
I know. Like I said, I had this call about my event, so
it's all good. It's all good. I appreciate the time you spent with us, and a pleasure to see you. I hope we get to see a joint venture back on our air again. And Jackie, it's always a pleasure to hang out with you. And one of these days, we'll share a bong hit. Okay.
I would love that. Thank you. It was really nice to be here. I really appreciate it. It was good to see everybody.
All right. We're going to come back.
Good to see you all. Thank you.
Don't go away. We got two more coming up in just a few minutes.
I'm a fan.
That's Liz Grow, Pro Cannabis Media's newest show host for a new show, Calling All Growers with Liz Grow. Liz is a High Times TV personality who'll be joining our talk show program starting in February.
I picture a company that stands the test of time.
Stopping at nothing to meet the people who are growing this plant generation after generation.
Calling All Growers will be more than just another interview and talk show, especially if you subscribe to the Calling All Growers workshop and webinar. That's 2 weeks after the live talk show on the same growing network, Pro Cannabis Media and PCM TV.
This is a show about interviewing the top growers in the game. It's a platform where they can share tips, tricks, and secrets for those growers coming up. Cultivators are some of my favorite people in the world, and I can't wait to talk to some of these growers.
It all starts on Wednesday, February 9th, live at 8 p.m. Eastern on PCM TV, on Roku, Apple, and ProCannabisMedia.com. Subscription-only workshops 2 weeks later on the 23rd. Sign up today to hold your spot.
What's your favorite strain?
Free.
If you're a grower or interested in learning more, tune in or...
You're missing out. Calling All Growers with Liz Grow.
Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it actually will make lives more difficult because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Pro-Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. Welcome back to Green Rush Live, the final half hour of this 2-hour Business of Cannabis talk show. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media. Christopher Smith has been alongside since the very beginning when we started with an interview with Michael Correa, the Director of Government Relations for the NCIA. And then we turned the page and we started talking about women in media in the cannabis space. And we're so happy that Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report and Crane Media has decided to stick around and hang out with Heather Allman. And we know that Teri Buhl is out there. The two of you are both Cannabis Law Report peeps, right?
That is correct.
All right. Teri, how are you?
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, no. And how are you doing, Teri? Because it's been a while. Certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, I think we talked when Kurt Dalton was with us. But how are you doing?
We're doing great. Heather and I just broke a story about some issues in Colorado with the state legislator and a senator running for Congress with Heather this week. So it was exciting.
So that's still, as a journalist, and I know this is true, does it drive all of us here? Do we still want to be first and exclusive? Is that driving you, Teri?
Always. Definitely as a freelance journalist, the way my byline is known, I'm not going to print unless it's something new or I'm breaking an investigative story, usually about a publicly traded company. And I love it. And it never gets old and it's always a thrill. And I feel valued doing it.
And how about you, Heather?
Oh, I thank you again for being here, and I really get the thrill from being able to give other people a voice, whatever that may be, and I think that's what drives me. I find that there's a big hole in real life stories and actuality in cannabis media, and I love people like Teri that are out there on the ground doing that investigative work and can break things. And now I can give her a voice on the podcast to promote her as well as her work. So it's very mutual. I find, a lot of times with women working in cannabis media.
And Debra, I know you've broken a few stories over the years, so this drives you as well.
Not as much, honestly. And mostly because good example, last week I broke a story about the New York medical marijuana program being offline. Nobody had reported this. I was super excited. I was like, oh my God, I got this great, scoop here. Go out with the story. And it just went, bleh. It was like, people went, nah. And it was so disappointing because I remember when, if that happened in Oregon or Washington a few years ago, it was the biggest thing. It was a scandal. It was horrible. And I was just like, really? Really? And so I kind of have gotten, I love to be able to break a story, but it doesn't drive me because then I get disappointed if it just goes, bleh, bleh. So to me, it's more about, it's about giving value and really taking a story. And because I am a business reporter, it's more about taking a story that maybe people can't quite wrap their heads around, and I help get them there. So I make these kind of difficult, complicated pieces of information more accessible. And so that's, to me, that's what drives me, is to be able to kind of take that language and reinterpret it so that people can understand it.
Christopher, how about you?
What are you asking me? What?
Are you driven to be first,
to be the
or
scoop?
are you driven just to be a storyteller and a regurgitator of facts?
I am a storyteller all the way, actually, myself personally, and I am not a trained journalist. I'm an advocate who kind of was brought in or inspired to get into the industry, really, by stories that I heard from people who had lived through some of the things that we're all hearing about, veterans and children, for example, who had been through things, and their mothers who had driven past politicians and past the law and fought everybody to get their medicine for their child. So those kinds of stories are the things that motivate me and get me out of bed in the morning. If I'm lucky enough to catch breaking news story, I'm happy to have it, but it's the bigger story, and it's really the human connection. That's what gets me going.
Teri and Heather both work for the Cannabis Law Report. What's the biggest issue facing cannabis law in legal states now? Is it employee drug testing? Is it illegal grows? What do you think is the most controversial or the biggest story as far as the law is concerned in these transitional states? Teri, go ahead.
Okay. I think it's just a fundamental issue that we all know impedes raising capital. It's a Safe Banking Act. I mean, and the simple fact that just isn't passed yet and likely won't pass this year. Everything from, Cory Booker, right, who's now has legalization in his state, trying to hold up the ability for these companies to go ahead and have, a bank account and get access to capital, I think is ridiculous and frustrating. And there's so much behind the scenes work going on with that. And I don't know when that's ever going to end. So that's kind of always frustrating, a little bit disappointing. The other issue I think legally that we really, people are concerned about and finally starting to voice out more is the issues of each state allowing, certain levels of testing and testing standards, and how the level of THC, say in hemp, which is like a story that Heather and I just talked about happening in Colorado, that's not at a federal level, and that each state can have their own standards to do what they need to do, and that laws put in place aren't followed up by, say, a Department of Agriculture or whatever governing body each state is supposed to be following up on.
Heather, what do you think?
Well, I think that it's interesting that Teri and I do completely different types of journalism. She does more of that fact-based, driven, investigative, wants to shed the light, the truth on what's really happening. So she finds a lot of interesting niche stories in the industry. I would say they run the gamut, but they usually involve the bad players. And unfortunately, that usually rolls around somehow to either compliance or, again, legal issues, where there are things going on, as in this story we're talking about now with Colorado, like things going on where politicians are using power to bring criminal charges against cannabis investors and operators. And it really is scary to think about that. And I just think it's interesting for me because I get to do things like interview the people on the other end of the story. So I think that's a little bit plays into what Christopher said about what drives him about real people. I like the actuality of a story. I want to know who the people are, not only the facts, but without people like Teri doing that, I wouldn't have anybody to talk to. So.
And Jimmy, just to explain better what we're talking about, we broke news that there's a senator named Don Quorum who's running against Congresswoman Boebert. I don't know if anyone knows who she is. I mean, she's in the media all the time for saying things that don't always add up. She's also Republican and part of the Freedom Caucus. He went out and had basically a customer, some Denver businessman who ran a publicly traded company who went bankrupt and couldn't pay him for his biomass. He had them arrested criminally using an obscure farming law in Colorado State. And two of them pled to misdemeanors, and one's going to trial, and he's fighting a felony. And he basically circumvented the bankruptcy laws in the case so he could jump over secured creditors, meaning other people who had loaned them money, right, to get his $54,000 back. It's an insane story that will set case law for anyone who is in Colorado acting as what they call a dealer, selling, hemp.
Hemp.
It's hemp, not marijuana. It's hemp.
Yeah, they separate, definitely. They even have different governing bodies from what I understand, where the Department of Agriculture is regulating hemp versus, and there's another government agency regulating the cannabis.
Sure, understood.
Yeah.
I think we're both surprised to hear that
And
this
there's
trouble is
different
happening on the hemp
dealer
side, which is an
licenses too,
agricultural crime.
right?
There are different
Right.
dealer licenses, Teri said. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah.
Debra, what do you think is the biggest issue? And, obviously follow the money, right? I mean, multi-state operators are, merging and acquiring other companies, and the bigger getting bigger. And some companies are able to circumvent the stock exchange by going to Canada and going public that way. What do you think is the biggest issue facing the cannabis space from a legal perspective?
Well, I would say obviously the federal illegality. I mean, we know that the Safe Banking Act passed the House again. But
Six
now
times. If you're scoring at home, ladies and gentlemen, that is the sixth time.
knows?
Okay.
Lost track. But now it'll go to the Senate and will likely, fail there once again. That's holding everything up. But having said that, it also still allows for opportunity and entrepreneurship, because once it does become federally legal, it's going to change the cannabis industry dramatically, and not for the better. So while I'm part of the camp that believes that it will actually be pretty devastating for a lot of people in the cannabis industry versus being this wonderful thing. So I'm kind of okay with it not happening. We've been able to work around it. It's certainly not hurting Trulieve making $200 million a quarter, or GTI or Curaleaf or any Cresco Labs. I mean, we could throw a bunch of names out that are, making over 100 million of revenue in a quarter. So to me, yes, that's a legal issue, but I think the longer we can put that off, the better.
Yeah. And well, Teri, I heard her say, you're not confident not anything's going to happen in 2022. Am I right?
Yeah, no, I'm not. We would have to gut the Senate right now.
Yeah, I don't think anything's going to.
How would we go about gutting that Senate? Because I'm all for that. Okay. I'd like to see the Senate actually look like America again. It doesn't. It drives me crazy.
Term limits.
I totally agree on term limits, 100%. And but I don't know how the heck you're going to get it past them right now. And then, all they want to do is get reelected, right? Isn't that what a politician is all about?
You would think they would just get in for a couple of terms, because then they get the paycheck and they get the insurance for the rest of their lives. I mean, why would you? Other than they just like the perks of being there.
It's a power thing as well. Yeah. I think they stay there because they get this power, and that's hard to let go of. And that's part of what's holding up. I mean, I tend to agree with Deborah on your assessment of federal regulation. I think that if the cannabis industry, we can keep the amendment about states' rights, and we can keep it the way it is, and we can run it the way it should be run, but get banking so that there's more safety involved and more consistency. I think that would be, I'm fine with that too. I'm a medical cannabis consumer as a patient here in Florida, and I just see that, we don't get taxed in Florida, and that's something that would completely change if we were federally regulated.
Right.
I'm with you on that. Deschedule or bust is what we say out here in California. Deschedule or bust.
Well,
just knock it down off of Schedule 1, and that will loosen up everything else.
And all due respect to Senator Booker, and I heard Teri mention this, I think it was Teri or Heather, one of you two just mentioned it. I understand why he's so passionate about the expungement and about getting prisoners out of jail that have been incarcerated because of the failed war on drugs. I support that 100%. I do think that the safe banking and decriminalization will actually help that effort after the fact. I really think they should just focus on those two things before a federal regulation comes in. But I know one thing, they ain't listening to me because they aren't listening to anybody down there.
Well, safe banking's not really going to change all that much, because it's not going to bring in the big banks there or the credit card companies. They will not move until it's federally legal. And they've all said that over and over. But, look, I've talked to companies that are creating all these workarounds on the credit card side and creating special separate
tiers.
Yes. Yep. And that actually could be kind of amazing for us in just the financial world going forward if we have these people through the necessity and the need to create these things. And so to me, that's kind of like what we're seeing along with the cultivation. All the advances that cannabis has made on the cultivation front, that is going to benefit the world in general for food sources when we start to get into even more dramatic climate change issues. So it could be kind of interesting, in my belief, that the cannabis industry could make massive advances on indoor growing for the world. And then if we unlock this banking thing, we might be able to get Visa and MasterCard off our backs and have another option. And that could be pretty neat.
Yeah, well, there is an option. Kind Tap is a credit card for the cannabis industry, right? I mean, they're out there. They're in legal states. I know the people that are involved with that. They've been on this show and talked about it. But I got to tell you guys, I'm an ancillary company. I'm looking to build subscriptions and teach workshops, and I can't get banking.
Interesting. I never had a trouble with it. I was at Wells Fargo, and
this is the second time Square and PayPal don't want to have anything to do with me. And it has to do with the fact if they track the transaction. And by the way, we got shut down after I bought my own T-shirt on my own website through Square just to see, follow the money, right? I wanted to see where the charge was. There was on American Express, then it was and then there was a portion in the checking account, and I followed it, and then they shut us down. And the amazing thing, when you get shut down by Square, try to find a human being that will answer the phone, because it's nearly impossible on that.
Like PayPal, it's really hard to get a human.
Right.
I'm not sure there are humans working at PayPal. It may be, it may be AI at this point. We're just not aware yet.
Yeah.
I think it's sad though that can, like, for not just operators but consumers, ancillary businesses, like this isn't affecting everyone in this sphere, from point A to point B to point C to point Z. And they seem to be so focused on, as Teri mentioned, Cory Booker, restorative justice, 100% behind that, social equity, 100% behind that. But I agree. I think if we could start with giving people like you, for example, Jimmy, people that are trying to do something good in this industry, the opportunity to use a system that everyone else has access to, every other industry, that would give us not only legitimacy, but a more credible voice, and we would be able to operate more smoothly.
Well, hallelujah to that, Heather. I got to tell you, it's been a very frustrating start to 2022 for me in that regard. But let's not go there. Last thoughts about the law and cannabis. We all know that we're up against it, that the industry is the most regulated. They look for you to screw up, really, rather than to support your industry. They go out of their way to do that. Is it going to be dependent on the federal movement, or can we see more and more states, like even Mississippi now has a medical program? I never thought I'd live to see the day that Mississippi.
I did not. They finally got good weed in Mississippi.
Right? What's the University of Mississippi's going to do now, right? What are they going to do with all their old stuff that have been kept in the freezer for 6 years?
I hope they burn those fields. I've seen them. It is the driest stuff I've ever seen in my life. I cannot even understand what's going on there. But I'm so happy that governor, like, that just kind of, nobody in the South expected that to happen. And being here in Florida, Mississippi, I'm like, if they can do it, anybody can do it. Anybody can do it.
I think the legislature fought back pretty hard on him. They worked hard. They worked hard all summer long. And when he came back and said, I'm not going to support it because it's 11 joints, blah, 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 they all said, we worked way too hard to let that all go, man. Forget it. We will veto you and we will shut you down. And he said, uh-oh. He blinked.
Well, and how does he know how much people need? I'm a medical patient myself.
He doesn't know. It's a lie.
No, that's what I said. I have dropped 26 medications to 5. I suffer from multiple sclerosis. and I have 19 medications that are gone because of cannabis. So I totally think that is an individual number, though, for everybody. And there's no way that, the governor knows better that 11 joints or 10 joints might be the magic number. I say, yeah, it needs to be passed. And I'm glad that they're moving forward, but still a difficult road ahead. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. And how dare the governor get in between people and their medicine? It would never happen in any other sphere, right? Never happen anywhere else. It's unbelievable.
Teri, you want to give a plug to Cannabis Law Report and how people can subscribe to it?
There's no subscription, right? I think it's free. So it's just www.cannabislawreport.com. And you can always follow me at Buhl Reports at Twitter.
There you go.
To learn the stories that we're running.
It's actually cannabislaw.report.
Thank you.
Yes. It's
cannabislaw.report. Yeah, we're getting away from the .com and .nets, and we're getting into the .ios and the .reports and the .co and the.
Well, speaking of that, there's capital money. I mean, we're not a .com. We're not making any money at this point. We're just trying to get things out there, and and we're people like us. Me and Teri, like we do this, and we love what we do, and that's why we keep doing it. And hopefully one day, there'll be some capital involved with the newsroom side. I mean, I know how it is. Like, I understand what she was saying from Politico. It's like, yes, that's important. When you have those resources and you have that available to you, that makes a huge difference in reporting.
Absolutely. And Deborah, the Green Market Report is now moving on to a hemp report. Am I right?
Well, actually, we just launched our psychedelic newsletter today.
Okay, psychedelic. Sorry,
Yes.
I got the wrong. Sorry, I knew there was a new something.
Yeah,
Go
we
ahead.
have a new newsletter called Psychedelia, and that just launched today. And then our weekly newsletter will be renaming it the Weekly Stash. That will be rebranded next week, and then we're going to start. We were already doing a daily hit story. Just kind of a recap of the day's news at the end of the day. And we'll push that out as a separate newsletter. So we're going to start to expand our newsletter offerings. And as I mentioned in the last half hour, we have a women's business conference in New York City on April 28th. So I'm getting geared up for that. So a lot of effort goes into the planning stages for that. So we'll have 2 more events later this year. So it's going to be a big year for Green Market Report. I'm pretty excited.
Well deserved. And when you offline, let's talk about let's create a promotional video for you guys, and we'll run it in our programming for your event. Happy to do that.
I did want to say, if anyone wants to reach out about being interviewed, I do the Karma Koala podcast by Cannabis Law Report, and you can reach out to me through our website, but also Heather J. Allman, like the Allman Brothers, at gmail.com. Heather J. Allman at gmail.com. You can hit me up with the story, and I do the features, and I love to give people a voice.
The Allman Brothers is still my favorite band. Christopher, thank you so much for
You're very welcome.
Coming on. Deborah, always a pleasure. You guys both are welcome anytime. We're going to start to get more and more of our We Talk News correspondents involved with our business show on Friday. It just makes perfect sense because everybody has their own brand, and we're here to just share stories and try to normalize what has been a real challenge over the last few years. So Teri and Heather and Deborah, thank you so much. Christopher, always a pleasure to talk with you, always available as well. For everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media, including our birthday boy, Dan French. He's 23 years old, people. He's running master control for this network out of his bedroom. Okay. It's an amazing story. He is, that's right. He is something else. I wish he would come on camera one day so you could all see him, but he likes to be behind the screen, behind the curtain, and making sure that the microphones work, that the connections are right, the right videos are running. It's a lot on this kid's plate, and I so appreciate it. So
he's the Wizard of Oz.
The Wizard of PCM for sure. I can tell you that. So for everybody here, remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. We Talk News is coming up next. Don't go away. Coming up on We Talk News this week, if at first you don't succeed, try again. How about the 6th time that the Safe Banking Act goes to the U.S. House? It's official. Mississippi is the 37th state in the union with a medical marijuana program, and their governor signs it into law. The NFL had a tough week after facing a lawsuit from former coach Bryant, but they did manage to grant $1 million for research to study CBD and other cannabinoids for its pain management benefits for the players. All that and state reports from coast to coast on We Talk News next. Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Elena Pinto reporting for Pro Cannabis Media. Our top story comes from Washington, D.C., where lawmakers continue to try to enact federal reform. Now it's the Safe Banking Act's 6th effort to pass in the House. And this time it's being attached to the Competes bill. And that's the Creating Opportunities to Meaningfully Promote Excellence in Technology bill. Safe banking was attached to the national defense vote in the Senate last year, but it got dropped at the last minute. Colorado Congressman Ed Perlmutter is hoping the 6th time is the charm for safe banking because he's retiring after this session, after being the original author of that bill. And with the rest of the news from our nation's capital, here's Vote Pro Podcast's Phil Adams with the DC Report.
Hi, I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC Report. The Washington, D.C. City Council unanimously approved a measure this week to expand access to medical marijuana for seniors and declare a cannabis tax holiday. The Medical Marijuana Patient Access Extension Emergency Amendment Act of 2022 allows DC residents 65 and older to self-certify their own eligibility for medical marijuana without having to get a doctor's recommendation. The legislation also extends the registration renewal deadline and creates a 1-week sales tax holiday for medical cannabis starting on 4/20. The aim of the legislation is to remove some of the logistical hurdles for senior patients and to stem the growth of districts' black market sales by encouraging DC residents to buy their cannabis from licensed dispensaries. A member of the Maryland House of Delegates introduced a bill this week to regulate adult use in the state should voters pass the ballot initiative he introduced late last year. In December, Maryland Delegate Luke Clippinger, who serves as chairman of the recently formed House Cannabis Referendum and Legalization Work Group, filed a bill to put legalization on the state's 2022 ballot. Confident that Marylanders will vote in favor of the referendum, Clippinger this week introduced House Bill 837, which would allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis. The bill also provides for automatic expungements for those with prior cannabis convictions. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer met with a group of cannabis reform advocates this week to provide an update on the pending Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. Offering only vague details about the timeline for introducing the bill, Schumer told participants it will be done, quote, soon. Schumer also addressed criticism he's received over how long it's taken to file the CAOA, saying that he and Senate colleagues want to take their time to ensure that equity provisions are effectively incorporated into the legislation. Groups represented at the meeting include the Drug Policy Alliance, the Cannabis Regulators of Color Coalition, Immigrant Defense Project, Women Grow, Vocal New York, and Normal's Rochester, New York affiliate, Rock Normal. That's this week's Weed Talk News from around the Beltway. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
The next big national story is about the National Football League, and this time it has nothing to do with the Super Bowl or Tom Brady's retirement. This one has to do with the league's efforts to manage pain and move away from the opioids it used to prescribe on a daily basis. The league will study the role cannabis and CBD have on inflammation and managing the pain that football players have on a chronic level. And that $1 million grant is going to researchers at University of California, San Diego, and the University of Regina. With the rest of the news from the Golden State of California, here's the American Cannabis Report's Christopher Smith.
Hey, thanks for the nice intro. This is the first California report for February 2022 for Weed Talk News. Groundhog Day just passed, and it looks like we're going to have 6 more weeks of 72 and sunny. Sorry, Jimmy, I couldn't resist. Back to the left coast, North Bay Credit Union of Santa Rosa, which is north of San Francisco, is offering a special bonus to its cannabis customers, a share in a special $250,000 dividend. It's the first patronage dividend in the credit union's history. Unlike most commercial banks, North Bay Credit Union has been serving the cannabis industry since 2019. Now, if you'd think that prohibitionists would have looked for someone else to pick on in the 25 years since we legalized the plant for medicinal use back in 1996, unfortunately, you'd be dead wrong. Fortunes, families, and farmers' lives have been lost fighting for their piece of the California dream, and still, a Republican Assembly member whose name shall not be spoken has proposed that illegal grows again become a felony. Now, it's unlikely that this felony fever dream will ever become law. Finishing up with 2 branding stories, a new brand just launched in California that we can be proud of, Black Buddha Cannabis. Black Buddha is set to establish a new paradigm for the industry as a Black-owned, environmentally conscious, wellness-focused, and equity-driven brand. Founder Roz McCarthy launched the company after recovering from a car accident that left her with a traumatic brain injury. Cannabis literally saved McCarthy's life, and she created the Black Buddha Cannabis brand as a testament to her healing. Last, it wouldn't be a California Roundup without a head-scratcher. California pastor Craig Gross is described by High Times as an entrepreneur, an adult pastor, and a founder of the XXXchurch.com. That's the LA version of a triple threat, baby. XXX Church is not a Vin Diesel joint, however. It's a church whose website looks like St. Peter got a web design job with Fast Company. The book on the homepage promises a new way to talk about sex, porn, and masturbation. And if that didn't make you barf into your bong water, the Porno Pastor has just launched, you guessed it, Christian Cannabis, which will include biblical ingredients such as frankincense and myrrh. Now, what do you want to bet? That they offer a strain called Burning Bush that makes you see God and change your evil ways? You heard it here first. I'm Christopher Smith, publisher of the American Cannabis Report, bringing you visions of beaches, bongs, and burning bush for Weed Talk News.
Montana's legal cannabis industry is off to a booming start. That state did $1.5 million in sales the first day. But now, after 30 days, basically the first month, the total is $12.8 million in sales. That total also generated over $2 million in tax revenue. Mississippi is now the 37th state in the U.S. to decriminalize cannabis, and Mississippi's Governor Tate Reeves signed that bill this week, starting its medicinal marijuana program. The governor did reiterate the fact that he recognizes the medicinal benefits of the cannabis plant, though he did say those who really want a recreational program, it could lead to more people smoking and less people working with all the societal and family ills that brings. Next state report, we go down to Florida with Heather Allman.
I'm Heather Allman from Cannabis Law Report with This Week in Florida for Weed Talk News. Ballard Partners recently launched a national cannabis practice group and tapped Courtney Coppola for the new venture. She once served as director of Florida's Office of Medical Marijuana Use and developed the state's regulatory framework, so her talents will be used wisely. On February 1st, Representative Dodie Joseph spoke out in favor of cannabis access and directly against the war on drugs, as she tweeted, quote, "For those who just need medical attention, I want them to get the help they need instead of just being locked up." Joseph, a Democrat, worked as a city attorney in Miami-Dade County and since leaving has openly disapproved of how the state handles drug crimes. She's now sponsoring HB 725, which aims to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana and decrease criminal penalties. Cannabis possession of 1 ounce or less would incur a $50 fine rather than a potential first-degree misdemeanor charge under the proposed bill. Although both parties agree that cannabis conversation is far from over, with the Republican-led Senate this session, HB 725 faces an uphill battle and has yet to be scheduled for committee hearing. In other news, First Coast Security has laid off nearly 300 employees in Florida. The job cuts were made after the company lost its contract with Trulieve, the state's largest medical cannabis company. The layoffs were not announced publicly until January 28th, and they mostly affected 283 armed security guards. However, managers, supervisors, and dispensary employees in nearly every corner of the state were also cut, affecting at least 30 locations on the Gulf Coast alone. That's a wrap for Florida Cannabis this week. I'm Heather Allman from Cannabis Law Report for We Talk News.
Back to the Northeast now, and Rhode Island legislators continue to work on a bill that will open up the adult use market in the Ocean State. The big question left, though, is who is going to set up regulations and enforce them? Right now, the Department of Business Regulation is overseeing the medical program in that state, and some legislative leaders want a designated commission to oversee both programs. These are not deal breakers, and expect legal adult use in Rhode Island sometime this year. Now let's head up to Vermont with Jessie Lynn Dolan.
I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. Capadonna and Inspect a Deck of Wu-Tang with the Sensi All-Stars, brought to you by Sensi Magazine, will be featured at a February 4th celebration at Zen Barn to usher in Vermont's newest industry and say goodbye to prohibition. The show starts at 9, so jump on the bandwagon. Proof of COVID vaccination or negative test within 72 hours is required. The Cannabis Control Board met for the third time in the last week and a half to continue its review of submitted public comments relating to proposed Rules 1 and 2. Meeting hours went long past the allotted and scheduled time. One thing they're still considering is requiring cannabis producers to use biodegradable or reusable packaging, but remain on the fence as to whether or not such a requirement would be too onerous. Vermont Cannabis Solutions law firm's February luncheon and networking event, which was canceled in January due to COVID, came back February 2nd at Gaston Weed Company in Stowe. They held this event on private property, so it was consumption friendly, and product sample exchanges were encouraged. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
While the cannabis movement continues in one state after another in the US, in Europe, it's a little different. Stephen Arthur George has our weekly European Cannabis Report, and he has the latest on some more countries who are moving towards setting up legal markets.
I'm Stephen Arthur George from Kai Advisors in Lisbon, Portugal. This is the European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Israel imported over 43 tons of cannabis in 2021. Israel, although not in Europe, is becoming one of the largest importers of medical cannabis globally. In 2021, they imported over double that of Germany. And as I said, although not in Europe, Israel is emerging as one of the big players in the medical cannabis industry and will continue to do so moving forward. Back in Europe, Poland emerges as the next possible big player. There is now over 10,000 active patients with medical cannabis prescriptions. This makes Poland one of the top 3 largest markets in Europe. Regulation changes were also discussed last month in Parliament, but nothing has been published as of yet. A little bit farther south, the Canadian mafia has its eye on legal cannabis trade in Europe. It was reported this week that the Canadian mafia has been buying up farms in Spain. With the rise in CBD consumption in Europe, they see a large opportunity. That being said, luckily, most legal programs require a very stringent back check for prior criminal activity. That's the European Cannabis Report. I'm Stephen Arthur George from Kaya Advisors, reporting for Weed Talk News.
The Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt is introducing a hemp-based report every week. And on Friday, she joins Jimmy Young on Green Rush Live to talk about women in cannabis media. For now, here's Deborah's Green Market Report this week.
This is the business update from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News. This week, earnings season kicked off with a big name. The Scotts Miracle-Gro Company reported that company-wide sales in the quarter dropped 24% to $566 million. The company also announced plans to restructure its hydroponics subsidiary, Hawthorne, after the sales dropped. Scott said it will take a restructuring charge of up to $5 million in the second quarter. Verano made a big move into the coveted New York market with a large acquisition. They are buying Goodness Growth Holdings, which has the subsidiary called Vireo Health, in an all-stock deal valued at $413 million. New York is in the process of creating its program for adult use sales, which are expected to begin in 2023. And like a broken record, High Times has seen another CEO depart and has extended its Reg A offering yet again. Peter Horvath resigned from his position, and Paul Henderson was named the newest CEO, making that 4 CEOs in 4 years. Henderson is also the interim CFO, so that's 2 C-suite executives for the price of 1. That's it for this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt, and this has been your business update from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
Access to capital is still the biggest challenge in the cannabis industry, and it's not specific to any state. In Pennsylvania, it's especially challenging, and that's why we depend on Claudia Post from the Most Cannabis Group to tell us what's hot and what's not in the Keystone State.
I'm Claudia Post from Most Consulting Group, right here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for Weed Talk News. First up, smaller companies are being sidelined in Pennsylvania because of access to capital and the total financial requirement to open up dispensaries or retail stores. According to the industry report, a publicly traded company and a private multi-state operator have more of a chance to get these licenses than small operators. As a matter of fact, 83% of the medical marijuana stores in Pennsylvania are owned by these multi-state operators and publicly traded companies. Capital is much more expensive for small operators. Their percentage of interest is in the mid-teens, extremely expensive. And getting into Pennsylvania medical marijuana market is not cheap at all. But the real problem is the cap on licenses, says Todd Hughes, chair of the board of Minority Business Association. That is a problem because if there's only a limited amount of licenses and the other folks don't have that money, they're totally squeezed out. The only way for an operator to expand is to buy a store, and the average price is $25 million. And as I said, I think that's a low number. And so the real issue here in Pennsylvania is access to capital. As congressional lawmakers pursue a bill to federally protect banks that work with legal marijuana businesses, a bipartisan pair of Pennsylvania senators have announced that they will soon introduce a companion bill right here in the Commonwealth. Senators Santo and Street distributed a co-sponsored memo to colleagues unveiling their plan to file this bill that would safeguard banks and insurers against being penalized by state regulators. Many cannabis-related businesses are locked out of the banking system without access to financial tools. And this is what they're trying to eliminate. The problem is that if they can't do banking, they're doing a cash business, which disproportionately puts their staff, their patients, and the community at large at risk. It's a public safety issue. The pending legislation would make it so no state agency could prohibit, penalize, or otherwise discourage a financial institution or insurer from providing financial insurance services to legitimate cannabis-related businesses or the business associates of legitimate cannabis-related businesses. It's a very tough thing. The rules that govern the cannabis industry in Pennsylvania were loosened during the pandemic. Dispensaries were declared an essential business, and patients were given access to telemedicine consultations to obtain medical marijuana cards. The number of registered caregivers was expanded to unlimited, and home delivery was approved, which says the ability to quickly meet the needs of the cannabis community is telling. As discussed earlier, while COVID fast-tracked certain aspects of PA cannabis industry, major hurdles still exist, i.e. access to banking. Well, that's a wrap for this week. For our PA Cannabis Report, I'm Claudia Post, reporting for Most Consulting Group, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. From We Talk News, have a great week.
In the Bay State, Revolutionary Clinics has grown into one of the most successful medical dispensaries in the state, with its 3 locations in the greater Boston area. And now, in an article in New Cannabis Ventures, CEO Keith Cooper outlines plans to expand to other states. You can see that article on the Pro Cannabis Media LinkedIn page. In the meantime, for the rest of the news from the Bay State, here's Ron Marshalsea.
I'm Ron Marshalsea with the Massachusetts Cannabis Report for We Talk News. Here in Massachusetts, the state is considering a bill that would establish cannabis cafes. In 2018, the Cannabis Control Commission started a pilot program where select cities and towns would set up cannabis cafes. Anyone 21 and older would be allowed to purchase and consume marijuana-related products on the premises of these places. On Monday, lawmakers took action to cut some red tape that would allow the pilot program to move forward. The bill includes a part where residents are able to weigh in on matters before the cafes are set up in their area. Recently approved state licenses will soon allow over 100 new cannabis cultivation sites to open for business, but they're going to have to fight for construction materials because of continuous supply chain problems. Charlotte Hanna of Rebel, a cannabis company based in New York with an adult use dispensary in Western Mass, was quoted as saying, "I'm dealing with supply chain like you wouldn't believe. It is terrible. My HVAC condensers are delayed until May. That is something that is killing our industry. It's 10 months to get these things. In Massachusetts, you can't grow cannabis without heating and cooling. We're not California. This is a massive problem." Hannah also says she doesn't think she'll be able to get her cultivation online this year at all. And finally, a few dozen workers at 2 different cannabis dispensaries filed petitions for union representation with the National Labor Relations Board last week. Gabe Camacho, political director for the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 1445, talked about how they've had an in-house committee of workers at those dispensaries that have been talking about improving their work conditions. Also, that the very issue of having union representation at the shop floor is extremely important. Equally important are wages, benefits, and other economic items. Local 1445 filed a petition for union representation on behalf of the employees of INSA in the company's Salem adult use retail outlet, as well as another the following day on behalf of workers at Sanctuary Medicinals in Gardner. That's this week's Massachusetts Cannabis Report. For We Talk News, I'm Ron Marshalsea.
Bay State Cannabis Report is supported by Holyoke Cannabis, Holyoke's finest cannabis recreational experience.
In Washington state, one of the first states to introduce legal cannabis sales, and they are now 10 years in. There's some changes, though, to the system that advocates are welcoming. Here's the Talking Hedge host, Josh Kincaid, with our report from that state.
I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Washington drafted a bill to protect qualified medical cannabis patients from arrest. Washington's developed one of the most intensely regulated systems of any state, including the unequal treatment of some patients over others with regards to the status under the law, something that's now being required to be improved upon via House Bill 1105 to provide equal civil and criminal protections to every Washington resident who has authorization from the healthcare provider for medical cannabis. No patient should face criminal charges simply because they've chosen not to be entered in a medical marijuana registry. It's been 10 years since Washington's led the nation by legalizing recreational cannabis across the state, and though there is still work to be done, this new legislation is a step forward. All individuals who use cannabis products medicinally are now one step closer to being guaranteed the same protection from arrest, prosecution, or having their plants seized, regardless of whether they're registered in the Voluntary Medical Marijuana Registry database. Next week, you guys are going to find out about Washington State's January cannabis monthly sales figures. But with that, we're going to have to roll up this Washington State Cannabis Report. I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge reporting for Weed Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't. And I'm out.
Next time you go to grab a soda, it might be one made with something green. Pepsi's latest Rockstar energy drink will be infused with hemp seed oil and spearmint, lemon balm, and caffeine. So no CBD or THC, but hey, it's a start. And that's Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Elena Pinto from Pro Cannabis Media. And remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there, so use it responsibly.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
Difference is building a solution for that individual. Not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the costs low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.
Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.